navigating, we have the Whispering Statue. We are on Chapter 4, Alias at Work. So an alias is like a fake name or fake identity. The girls had no idea which way to head for safety. One thing was in their favor. The men pursuing them were past middle age, heavy, and not so agile. "Where'll we go?" George asked, puffing a bit. "We can't run all the way back to the airport." "I know," Nancy replied. "And besides, our bags are in that station wagon. I think we'd better head there first and take them out." The girls sped on. As they reached the rear of the car, they turned to see where their pursuers were. The men were about 200 yards away. Nancy was thinking hard. Somehow she must outwit the potential abductors, so people trying to kidnap them. Spotting the key in the ignition, she cried out, "Girls, jump in!" "Why?" Bess asked. "If we try to carry those bags, we'll be caught," Nancy replied. As she slipped behind the wheel, her companions climbed in. She switched on the ignition, turned the car, and roared on down the sandy road. "Sensational!" George cried. "That's using your head." Bess looked frightened. Her conscience could not quite approve of Nancy's taking the car, yet she told herself under the circumstances there was nothing else to do. Meanwhile, George had looked back and was watching the men who stood in the road, anger and bewilderment on their faces. "You can't outsmart Nancy Drew," she said as if addressing them. Then she grinned. "Pardon, Debbie Lynbrook, it was you who did it." Nancy made good time back to the airport. Here she telephoned the Waterford Police Department and spoke to the officer in charge, Captain Turner. He was astounded at her story and said he would send men at once both to the airport and to the mansion. Do you know why those men wanted to hold you?" he asked. "No, I never saw them before, and I'm a stranger in Waterford." Nancy wondered if the three men were part of a gang that had something to do with the Basswood case or the Whispering Statue mystery. Had they penetrated her disguise? And how had they learned that the girls were arriving? "Well," said Captain Turner, "I advise you and your friends to watch your step." "We will," Nancy promised. Two officers soon arrived at the airport, and Nancy handed one of them the keys to the station wagon. He scrutinized the license plate, then said, "This is a stolen car. It won't help us trace those men, but the owner will be glad to get it back." The other officer had gone to telephone for a taxi to pick up the girls. Their taxi arrived in a few minutes, and the girls were driven to the yacht club, which was in the opposite direction to the old mansion. As they entered the expansive grounds, Bess exclaimed, "What a beautiful place!" There was a large garden with hedges on three sides. Flower beds were laid out in symmetrical patterns. Roses and delphinium were particularly prominent. At the far end of the grounds stood a long, formal-looking Italian-type building of white cement. When the taxi reached the entrance, two young men in well-fitting blue uniforms took their bags. They led the girls through a tastefully furnished lobby to a registration desk. Nancy asked for Mr. Ayer, the manager. "Please tell him that Debbie Lynbrook is here." A few moments later, the desk clerk took Nancy to Mr. Ayers' private office. She closed the door and shook hands with him. In a low voice, he said, "You're Nancy Drew?" "Yes. My father sent his greetings and said he would telephone you once in a while to find out how I'm getting along. You know I'm here to solve a mystery for Mrs. Merriam." "Yes, he told me, and I wish you all the luck in the world." Nancy did not mention the Whispering Statue. She would do that later. Right now, she wanted to settle the matter of accommodations and take a shower. Her race on the sand dunes to escape the would-be kidnappers had left her feeling pretty disheveled. She went back to the desk and registered as Debbie Lynbrook. The clerk, whose name was Sam Lever, suggested that the three girls share one bedroom. "The rooms here are very large. I have a nice one overlooking the bay. It has 2 double beds." The girls decided to take it. Upon seeing the room, they were delighted. It not only had a sweeping view of the bay, which was a few miles from the ocean, but the decorations were unusually attractive. After the girls had showered and were changing into slacks and sport shirts, they began to discuss the attempted kidnapping. George asked, "Do you suppose those men knew who we were, or had they just received orders to abduct 3 girls coming by plane?" Bess looked at Nancy, who once more had put on the wig and dark face powder. "I'm sure they didn't guess you're Nancy Drew," she said, "but they may have found out who George and I are. Oh, I'll never forget those 2 ugly men that came out of that mansion. I hope I never see them again." George grinned. "Don't bet on that. If they have been hired to keep us from solving the basswood puzzle or the whispering statue mystery, they aren't going to give up easily." Nancy telephoned police headquarters and asked for Captain Turner. "This is Debbie Lynbrook, Captain. Have those kidnappers been caught?" The officer said that unfortunately they had not. "We went to the mansion and found it deserted, although we did see some rope and several men's handkerchiefs which might have been intended as gags. I think you are right that the men planned to hold you girls there. But I want to assure you that all the police in surrounding towns have been alerted. If you feel, however, that you need our personal protection, please phone me." Nancy promised to do this and said goodbye. The girls ate lunch, then went back to their room. Bess stood at the window, taking deep breaths of the clear, salt air. "Let's forget those horrible men," she said, "and stroll down to that heavenly-looking beach in our swimsuits. I see a lot of boats." Within minutes, the girls were running barefoot along the sand, playing tag with the breaking wavelets. Nancy was dangling a bathing cap in her hand. "I'm glad it's calm," George remarked. "Say, maybe we could use one of those sailboats." There were a variety of boats tied up, small sailing dinghies, rowboats, Boston whalers. Larger sailboats were moored offshore. Several sailfish had been pulled up on the beach. "I'd rather take the Boston whaler," said Bess. "It's fast and easy to handle. I hate to be at the mercy of the wind, especially if those men try to catch us again," she added, shivering in spite of the hot sun. "I don't think the attendant would let us," Nancy replied, "at least not without checking us out. I wonder where he is." "Oh, come on, let's sail," George urged impatiently. "There's a sign by that boat," Nancy said, pointing to a flat-hulled racer. "Maybe it will clue us in on the rules." The girls read the sign carefully. Guests of the yacht club were allowed to take out the sailfish, dinghies, and rowboats at any time. Permission to use the Boston whaler and the larger sailboats had to be obtained from the attendant, but he was temporarily off duty. "Let's each take a sailfish and have a race!" George cried, running over to a pretty light blue boat with a yellow sail wrapped neatly around the mast. The mast and rudder had been placed carefully next to the hull. The mast is like when a tall pole on the boat where usually the sails are hung. I think the rudder is used for steering. Somebody keeps things ship-shape around here, she thought admiringly. Those boats look like painted wooden soldiers all lined up. "I'll stick to the rowboat, thanks," Bess said. "I'd rather be under my own steam. If I took a sailboat, the wind might blow me somewhere I didn't want to go," she added, glancing at a breakwater of rocks not far away. "Don't worry, Bess," said Nancy. "Why don't you come with me? We can always tack back when you say the word. It's a light offshore wind," she added, looking up at the pennant on the boathouse. So the pennant is like a little flag, a little triangular flag. "And I promise to head up into the wind whenever you're scared, although I don't relish getting in irons." "Oh well, if we do, you can jump out and push," Nancy laughed. "Thanks," Bess answered. "Why don't we all together in the Wee Scot?" a deep voice said. The girls wheeled around in surprise. The speaker was a smiling, attractive young man. "Who's he?" asked Bess. "Who's who?" the young man queried. "Wee Scot," Bess answered indignantly. The others chuckled. Wee Scott is the name of a class of racing sailboats, the stranger explained. Pointing to the harbor, he said, That white 15-foot sloop-rigged boat moored out there is one. Nancy turned to the young man. We'd love to try her, but the sign says we can only use the sailfish unless we get permission from the attendant. That's me, Dick Milton, the attendant, and you have my permission. From what I overheard, sounds as if you know what you're doing. Come on into the boathouse and get her a bag of sails. If you like the feel of her, you might enter the race here Saturday afternoon. People often refer to boats as she or her, for some reason. I don't know why. Soon the girls were in the dinghy rowing out to the Wee Scott named Top Job. Nancy had carefully covered her wig with a large bathing cap and firmly strapped it under her chin. What a bore this is, she complained, tugging at the tight strap. I hate bathing caps. It's better than catching your wig in the rigging or losing it overboard, George remarked. Then we would be in a spot. I don't think Bess and I could do much mystery solving without you. Nancy laughed. Oh, sure you could. I hope the name of this boat is prophetic, Bess said. Once aboard the Top Job, so she's prophetic, she's hoping it's indicative of the future, like it's top job, she was hoping it does a really good job. Once aboard the Top Job, George and Nancy had the mainsail and jib up in record time. So those are, I believe, sails. Sails catch the wind to push a boat along. Bess dutifully coiled the sheets. The wind is perfect, George sighed happily, taking the tiller. Top Job sailed smoothly, gathering speed as the sails filled. The boat was running before the wind. As the craft approached the mouth of the harbor, George noticed a post she assumed was a racing marker. She decided to have a look at it, thinking she might take part in Saturday's races. Ready about hard a lee, she called. Nancy uncleated the jib sheet, so I think she unclipped. Then she and Bess scrambled to the other side of the boat. Nancy trimmed the jib sheet, so I think she made it shorter, cheating it on the starboard side. George handed her the tiller, which helps steer, saying, Try her, she handles beautifully. Bess did not appear happy. Ugh, see all those messed up sheets, she groaned, straightening them out again. The wind is refreshing, Nancy remarked as the boat, picking up speed, began to heel over. This is fun. It's getting so dark, Bess said apprehensively, looking at the sky. That's strange, thought Nancy. It is dark and feels as though the wind's changing. Glancing at the pennant on top of the mast, she saw in dismay that the wind had shifted abruptly. Suddenly she yelled, Jibing over! The boom, so that's a large horizontal pole, swung across with a bang. George ducked, but the spar hit Bess, throwing her into the water. Bess, are you all right? George screamed. Nancy tried to steady the boat and tack away from the marker, which she saw was made of concrete. In a moment, the boat scraped hard against it, and they began to take in water. Here we go, she cried, as the Top Job slowly capsized. So if it capsized, it means it flips over. So they're in the water now. And that's the end of the chapter. We'll have to find out what happened.